Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm going to talk about our language. What we say, the words we use, affect how we think. If we use the wrong words, we risk miscommunication, we risk misunderstanding, we risk making mistakes. In the next few minutes, I'm going to propose that we look at the formula that we use pretty much universally to approximate risk. Risk is impact times likelihood. I'm going to propose we fix the formula, replace likelihood with frequency for low impact scenarios. I'm going to propose that we throw out the formula entirely for high impact scenarios. I'm going to propose and recommend that we go through our risk guidance and pretty much every instance of the word likelihood, replace it with credibility and replace the remainder with frequency. The point here is that we need the language of this advice to help us out with the most consequential, the most important decisions we make. Currently, it's geared to the least important. We can figure that out on our own. So, start at the beginning. The formula actually mostly works for low-impact scenarios. What is that? Someone clicks on a bad link. Someone clicks on a bad attachment. Malware takes over the laptop. It takes over 2 other machines nearby. We have to erase them. We have to restore from backups. It happens 23 times a year. The average cost is $17,000 in lost productivity and cleanup costs. Run the math. We can figure out how much this costs us every year. What I'm proposing here is, in that scenario, throw out the word likelihood and put in the word frequency. Frequency fixes the units on the formula. Instead of dollars, what comes out is dollars per unit time. This is what this risk costs us. What I'm arguing here is that when we're talking high consequence, low frequency incidents, we have a different equation. For the sake of argument, what is the risk that the entire North American power grid will be taken out for 3 days by a cyber attack? Well, we know the probability of such a thing, the likelihood is not zero, because the first rule of cybersecurity is nothing is secure. Given enough time, money, and talent, you can always imagine an attack bizarre enough to bring about the consequence. But if we go to our business decision makers asking for budget to address a risk like this, and they look at our numbers and they say, that probability there, where did that come from? You made that up, didn't you? Okay, business decision makers see through made-up numbers all the time. This is what they do for a living. And they're very reluctant to assign budget to made-up numbers. So this is why nobody makes up numbers for these high-impact scenarios. Everybody uses a qualitative scale. Likelihood goes from very low to very high, from a scale of 1 to 5. Consequence goes from very low to very high, 1 to 5. You do a grid like this. This is out of the 3-2, 62443 3-2 risk assessment. Everyone uses a grid like this. You assign a risk ranking to every element of your grid, 1 through 5 in each direction. And the expectation is that we design our defenses for our systems, depending on where they fit in the risk matrix. The strength of our defenses, the nature of our defenses reflects the risk ranking. The problem with this is that if you do the math, if you've got a very low impact, very high frequency event, it's 1 times 5, it's 5. If you've got a very high, this is the clicking on links scenario. If you've got a very high impact, very low frequency event, metros collide, hundreds of people die, that's also a 5. But the defenses that we deploy for people clicking on bad links versus high-speed metros colliding are dramatically different. The formula is confusing the process here. Waterfall, I work for Waterfall. Waterfall serves the world's most consequential sites. In practice, I do not see my customers, most of them, nothing's universal. Most of them using a grid like this. Concrete example. My colleague spoke yesterday, Jesus Molina. He is teaching a course at the University of Barcelona, his hometown, graduate course for practicing rail system engineers on 62443 for rail systems. He gives his classes, he's run it a couple of times, he gives his classes an exercise. He says, take the risk matrix, and this is not quite how a risk assessment works. You're supposed to assign a security level target to every system, every zone, every conduit. He says, for the sake of argument, assign a security level target to every box in the matrix, just to get them thinking about the risk and the criteria. And he says, the thing that surprised him was that, he has a mix of students. Some are practicing rail system engineers, some are other. Every practicing rail system engineer answered that exercise this way. On the left side of the box, they took likelihood into account. Likelihood reflected the security, was involved in figuring out what's an appropriate security level target. On the right side of the box, every one of them filled in SL4 for high impact and very high impact scenarios. Every one of them. And he went and he tapped him on the shoulder. He said, excuse me, what's going on here? Why is every one of you giving me the same answer? And they said, that's the law in Spain. This is what society expects when the consequences are serious, when we are making decisions about other people's safety. We are required by law to apply the strongest practical protections. Oh, so, people practicing in this space, a great many of them are already ignoring likelihood. They've thrown out the equation. It doesn't work for high impact scenarios. Why have they thrown it out? Well, you could say it's the law. You could also say they've thrown it out because likelihood does not make any sense. Likelihood suggests probability. It suggests we're estimating an objective probability. Probability means randomness. Probability is meaningless unless you've got a random process. Sophisticated cyber attacks are not random. Imagine that high-end ransomware comes after a shoe factory, encrypts 47 machines. We have to lay our people off. We bring in gurus like yourselves, clean the mess out, take the forensic images, restore from backups, bring people back. It costs 10 days. Imagine that in the course of that recovery, we change nothing. We say, well, it's unfortunate that this random event hit us. Let's recover and keep going, because given how few of these happen every year, it seems unlikely that we will ever get hit again with this kind of random event. Well, if the same attack comes after that factory a week later, what's going to happen? The factory's going to go down in exactly the same way it went down originally. Sophisticated attacks, the outcome of those attacks is not random. The first few steps in many of these attacks has a random element. The first few steps are often trick someone into clicking on a link. And we just said, there's some randomness in there. Sophisticated attacks overcome randomness with repetition. Keep hitting the target until somebody clicks. The outcome of sophisticated attacks is generally deterministic. In safety terms, every successful cyber attack is a design failure, not a random equipment failure. Similarly, you might say, well, somebody got into the IT network. It looked like they were trying to get into OT. We kicked them out. That's good. We suffered no consequences. Now we're good because we assume that targeting is random. In fact, sophisticated attacks are persistent. They will keep hitting us until they achieve their goal, whatever their goal is. And if we assume that it's random, we're going to make mistakes. The fact that a sophisticated threat actors come after us once means that it's almost certain they're gonna keep coming after us until they achieve their goal. We need to step up our game enormously. Thinking about these processes as random is gonna lead us to mistakes. This is why, again, high consequence decision making generally does not assume randomness, does not use the formula that assumes randomness. None of this is new. You look at the NIST 830, this is the risk assessment out of NIST. In the middle of the document, footnote number 55 says, likelihood could mean probability, but sometimes it means, you've got to look at your available evidence, you've got to make a judgment call. So there's recognition in the footnote that it's not always probability, it's not always random. Who reads the footnote? The rest of the document uses likelihood unqualified, as if it meant probability, as if it was a random process. Same thing in 62443. 3-2 is the risk assessment standard. It defines the term in the glossary as, likelihood is the chance of something happening, again, implying probability. There's a note right below the definition saying, by the way, you can determine likelihood objectively with frequency measurements or subjectively by exercising judgment. And then again, the word is used without qualification through the entire rest of the document. So this is recognized, but you have to read the fine print to see this. And the language of the standard is talking about likelihood as if things were random. And on the high end, they're not. So backing up, what's the solution here? Imagine that we have deployed a defensive posture. We are the security program owners in a business with dangerous physical processes. Imagine that the worst has happened. The cyber attacks got in, and they defeated our defenses, blew up a boiler, and killed somebody. What's going to happen? Well, there's going to be an inquiry, possibly a judicial inquiry. There might be charges of negligent homicide or criminal negligence. At some point, we are probably going to wind up on the witness stand. When that happens, what will the judge ask us? Will the judge ask us, when you made these decisions, when you designed this program, did you do the minimum the law requires? Did you follow the regulation? That's not the question the judge is going to ask us. Will the judge ask us, did you do the minimum the standard requires? You said it was SL4. Did you do the minimum that an SL4? That's not the question they're going to ask us. The question the judge is going to ask us is, when you made this decision, when you designed this system, did you do what any other reasonable person, skilled in the art, would have done if they were sitting in your shoes? Reasonable behavior is our legal obligation. The legal word for reasonable is due care. Okay, we have to make reasonable decisions. When we make decisions about other people's safety, we have a legal obligation of due care, meaning we have to do reasonable things. This, if you're curious, was the topic of chapters 6 through 8 in my most recent book. I made some mistakes in those chapters. This is why you hear me here, correcting some of those mistakes. If you're interested, the book is still available. You can request free copies from Waterfall on the Waterfall website. Please leave 6 to 8 weeks for delivery. If you're impatient, there's copies for sale, but you have to pay money for it at the bookstore downstairs. Reasonable is the legal obligation. I went through NIST 830, I went through 3-2. I said, can I substitute the word reasonable into this document? In most of the places, the word likelihood is used. Not where it's used in the formula, but where it's used. And the language was awkward. The language was convoluted. It didn't work. And so what I'm proposing here is that we define credibility as what it is reasonable to believe about threats, about attacks, about attack scenarios. The word credibility fits into the language of the standard. It fits into how we talk about risk much better than the word reasonable. But the word reasonable is at the core. We need guidance that will help us make reasonable decisions in high consequence arenas. So what I propose specifically is, take 3-2, it's open for revision right now. And I've made this proposal to the 3-2 group. I've made it to a number of standards groups. The sort of most common reaction is, that seems like a good idea. There's a majority saying, that makes sense. There's a minority pushing back, vigorous debate, but it's been a reasonably friendly reception. So I'm proposing add credibility to the glossary, define it as how reasonable it is to believe that something will happen. Add a note. By the way, if you have frequency data can determine credibility. So, you throw a bone to this simple decision process of, high frequency events, focus the language of the document on the high consequence, the difficult decisions. Replace the high frequency formula with risk is impact times frequency, not likelihood. And for the high level, drop the formula. In practice, what does this mean? Consider this. I was raised as a young man on a farm outside of Brooks, Alberta, Canada. 15,000 people, agricultural community in the middle of nowhere, literally an hour's drive from any larger community. Does the Russian military have the ability to buy 3 cyber gurus to plant a sleeper cell in the workforce of the town of Brooks water treatment system? Yes, they do. Probably cost them, have that sleeper cell sit on their hands for 3 years. Probably cost 5 or 7 million to get 3 gurus to sit in their hands for 3 years. Activate that cell after 3 years, devastating attack on the water system, cripple the water treatment system for 3 weeks. Do the Russians have the ability to do this? Yes, they do. Is that a credible threat? Not in my estimation. Why would they do that? What would the point be? This is an agricultural community in the middle of nowhere. Same scenario, 3 sleepers, 3 years, devastating attack on the city of Washington, D.C.'s water treatment system. Is that a credible threat? Well, yes, in my estimation, it is. This is how you use these concepts. Some of the pushback I got when I did this presentation to standards bodies is, well, how would you use this? One of the questions I got was, Andrew, it's great that you talk about credibility, but what if I don't have the budget to address credible threats? What am I supposed to do then? And I said, well, that's a really important question. That's a conversation you have to have with the people in your organization who control your budget. But I said, what I will say is, in terms of the wording, how would you ask that question? It's a really important question. How would you ask it with the word likelihood? What if I don't have the budget to address all very low likelihood threats? Well, you never have the budget to address all very low likelihood threats. What a silly question. There's an infinite number of threats. You can always imagine stranger threats. It's an important question that we just get confused if we try and stick the word likelihood in there. I have, 62443 deployed, security level 4 across the board. What credible threats remain? Well, again, an important question. Do any credible threats remain? How would you ask that with likelihood? What very low likelihood threats remain? Well, there's an infinite number of them. What a silly question. Why do you care? You can't even ask the important questions about high consequence decision making with the word likelihood. What does this look like graphically? You can still use the matrix. The left side of the matrix still reflects frequency, not likelihood, still reflects consequence. The right side of the matrix is different. Okay, we don't use the formula anymore. What we have is the set of all possible threats and all possible consequences, and we divide them into 2 sets, the ones we defeat reliably and the ones we don't. What does reliably mean? What does defeat with a high level of confidence, what does that mean? Imagine a bridge. Imagine that the engineering profession has figured out how to build bridges at 1/3 of today's cost, carbon fiber or something. The problem with the new design is harmonic frequencies. The new design is absolutely riddled with harmonic frequencies. A lot of us, I'm guessing, have seen the Tacoma Narrows Bridge disaster video. the engineers of the day had not figured out harmonic frequencies, a stiff breeze came up and the bridge tore itself to pieces. How happy would every one of us be driving across a bridge if we knew the design engineer hoped, that, sorry, back up, I missed a step. Okay, harmonic frequencies. To combat the harmonic frequencies, the engineers have built hydraulic dampers into the bridge. Multiply redundant dampers, multiply redundant power supplies, multiply redundant control system, AI controlling the dampers. The bridge feels rock solid. How happy would each of us be driving across that bridge every day if we knew that the design engineer hoped that if a cyber attack targeted the AI controlling the dampers, hoped that we could detect the attack before the bridge collapsed? How happy would we be driving across that bridge every day if we knew that the design engineer hoped that if we detected the attack early enough, we could scramble an incident response team fast enough to defeat the attack before the bridge was destroyed? Hope is not what we expect of design engineers. We expect bridges to be built, to be designed to carry a specified load in a specified operating environment for a specified number of decades with a large margin for error. What does that mean? I actually asked a person who designs pedestrian bridges. I said, how do you know the maximum load for the bridge? He says, oh, that's easy, Andrew. You design a barrier onto each end of the bridge. You cannot send vehicles onto the bridge. What you got on the bridge is people. Most people are less than 2 meters tall. Most people are mostly water. You model 2 meters of water, the width of the bridge, the length of the bridge, that's your maximum load. He says, and then you multiply the load by 8. And you build the bridge to hold the multiplied load. Why? Because these are people. Failure of the bridge under load is unacceptable. Increasingly, when I see high consequence decision making going on, we use bridge-style thinking. Engineering grade protections, overpressure relief valves, from cyber-informed engineering, manual fallbacks, unidirectional gateways to take entire threat vectors off the table. You use engineering-style protections to defeat with a high degree of confidence a certain class of attacks. DBT is the design basis threat. It is a description of the most capable attack we defeat with a high degree of confidence. And everything else above the line, we do what we can, but there's no guarantees, not high degree of confidence. I see people splitting the sea of all possible attacks and consequences in two with a design basis threat line and asking the question, do any credible threats remain above the line? And if there are, what do we do about them? Do we sign off on them and accept the risk? If we do, we should probably put a paragraph or 3 down somewhere saying why this is a reasonable thing to do. Or do we change the budget and move the line and move them below the line? This is the way that I see high impact decision making happening in this space. Cybersecurity in the high impact space is changing. It's becoming more like safety. Not in that safety models random equipment failures. It's becoming more like safety in terms of process. When was the last time you saw a manager overrule a safety engineer? Safety engineer comes in the office and says, I don't have budget to do what good engineering practice says I have to do to make this thing safe. I don't have enough budget for the safeties I need. The manager has 4 choices. The manager can fire the safety engineer and hire someone and see if they give him a different answer. The manager can increase the budget and fix the problem. The manager can cancel the project. If we can't afford to do it safely, we can't afford to do it at all. Or the manager can sign off on the safety system himself or herself and accept the liability if something goes wrong because they've overruled the safety engineer. I never see any manager overrule the safety engineer. This is what cybersecurity is becoming like for high-end, consequence decision-making. The expectation increasingly is that when we design a high-consequence automation system, we design that system to carry a specified threat load until at least the next opportunity to upgrade. And we all know that in high consequence scenarios, it takes a long time to do upgrades. We have upgrade opportunities at long time intervals. Carry a specified threat load at least until the next opportunity to upgrade with a large margin for error. This is what increasingly we're tasked with. Wrapping it up, I was talking to Ricardo de Paz at Woodside Energy. He's coming on as a guest on the next industrial security podcast episode. He makes cybersecurity decisions for offshore platforms. He is responsible for deciding, is this reasonable, is this enough? I asked him, how does he make that decision? And he said one of the tools, he has many tools he uses, one of the tools he uses is informal. He calls it a pub test. Imagine that you've got, he's got a decision in front of me. Imagine that I decide X. I decide to approve the project. And it's deployed, and 6 months in, this cyber attack comes in, breaches our defenses, blows something up and kills 6 people. Imagine what happens next. Everyone has a bad week, not least the friends and family of the victims. But imagine him dragging himself into the pub late, because every Friday he goes to pub with his peers from other divisions in the organization, from other organizations, and they share a beer and they talk about the week. He drags himself in. His buddies express their condolences. They fetch him a beer, and every one of them leans forward and says, "Okay, give. All we have is the news reports. What happened?" And he explains the design he was presented with, the decision he made, why he made it, the attack that came in that just breached X, Y, and Z, and bang, 6 people dead. He imagines, what's the reaction of his peers in these other organizations? Do they lean back and go, "My God, you poor sod, there but for the grace of God go I would have made the same decision. I would have, this changes the whole landscape. We have to do everything differently now." Or would they lean forward again and go, "You idiot, what were you thinking?" That's a clue. We have a legal obligation to make reasonable decisions. The language we use in the standards and the guidance, that language should use the language of societal expectation for high-impact decisions. We should use high-impact language. We can all figure out the easy stuff. Use the high-impact language to help us all make reasonable decisions to address credible threats with serious consequences. Because the sophistication of cyber attacks only increases, okay? 10 years ago, there were sophisticated attacks that we just legitimately discounted and said, that's just not credible. Today, they are credible. In a world where ever more sophisticated attacks become ever more credible, we need advice. We need advice, and in a world where attacks become more credible in high consequence scenarios, increasingly we as designers are going to be asked to sign here. So what I'm asking all of us is, lend your support to new language for risk. We need language. We need to change the language to help us make reasonable decisions, to help us make defensively reasonable decisions in scenarios where the worst case consequences of compromise are truly unacceptable, where we've got safety impacts, we've got critical infrastructure impacts. This is where we need the guidance to evolve to help us with that, because those scenarios are becoming increasingly credible. That's what I had for you. Thank you so much.